Hello and welcome to a new episode of Inequality Talks, the podcast from volunteers at Mellenvolkelijk Samenwerken Aarhus, where we interview experts in a field or topic related to inequality. Today I will be talking to Dr. Claiton Marcio Da Silva from Brazil about soybean production in his country and the effects that it has on farmers, the indigenous rainforest and more. This episode is made part of Our Food, Our Future initiative. Our Food, Our Future is a co-funded project by the European Commission and is an international coalition of civil society organizations working towards changing the global food system to be sustainable and socially just. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome Dr. Claiton to the show. Hello, Dr. Claiton.
Thank you for the invitation. I'm glad to be here.
Very welcome. I'm excited to speak to you. So I'll start by asking, who are you? What is your expertise?
Okay, I'm a historian. I'm currently an associate professor of history, environmental history and history of sciences at the Federal University of Southern Fronteira in Chapecó, state of Santa Catarina, Brazil, of course. And I've been studying these rural questions since 2002. When I was doing my MA, so I was very interested about this rural world resisting in facing this industrialized world we are living in. So it is bringing some good questions from 20 years from now.
Cool. And what did you? What's been your journey from starting your masters and starting to look into this kind of research about communities fighting back against this industrial machine? How did you get from where you started to what you know now?
Mm-hmm. I was 21 years old when I started my MA. And we were living a very interesting intellectual environment here in Brazil, tackling questions of cultural history, because it was a very relevant topic for that moment. But while everybody was interested in the urbanization and the industrial Brazil and industrial Latin America, I became very interested about the relationship between culture and dictatorship, because we in Brazil had a strong dictatorship from 1964 to 1985, and we often discuss the resistance against that dictatorship from the perspective of the urbanized world, students, working class, except for the rural guerrilla in the Araguaia region, for example, in the Amazonia in 1970s, early 1970s. So I was very interested in how the dictatorship was very interested in shaping, in molding new young rural laborers for, I would say, skilled laborers to drive new machinery, new tractors, new harvesters, and of course, in the trail of the Green Revolution, in the Cold War, of course, young people was the focus of these great programs. So as the United States developed in the early 20th century the program called 4H, health, head, hands, and something else with age. They explored this program in order uh, to modernize the rural villages, and it was exported after the World War II in the historical context of the Cold War to Latin America. So I was dealing with this U.S. Influence on Brazilian agriculture and this kind of modernization. And my PhD was in history of sciences, focus on how it all started and how these collaborations, this agricultural cooperation started in Brazil. It was between the Nelson Rockefeller, the multimillionaire and oil mogul from the United States, and how one of his associations, a philanthropic one, introduced this kind of work we call extension service. It was very important to understand how the Brazilian agricultural modernization we see today is very connected to this pattern of modernization and tradition at the same time. It's a very hybrid concept, because you understand the modern agriculture is intensive, while the traditional one is extensive. It means deforest, slash and burn. But now we have both working together in Brazil. We often destroy all soils, and at the same, because you have intensive agriculture, at the same time you destroy forests. So it's extensive. And this was part of my PhD thesis I will be publishing next year at the White Horse Press. And I will be glad to talk about that if you want to in the near future. When I was doing a postdoc at the Rachel Carson Center in 2017, everybody was very interested about soybean in Brazil. So I realized, why not? Sorry, would you ask me something? Sorry.
No, I was just going to say that it sounds like you've tried to create a link to the current farming practices that you can see in Brazil to the historical and cultural origins of where they come from, whilst including factors like post-imperialism, I would call it, with the USA influencing various policy. Also, to my knowledge, the USA had a large influence on the dictatorship that was in Brazil. Please correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
Which is classic USA policy in South America around that time. Still, some would argue now as well. And it sounds like you've gone into more detail than I can even imagine to explain how the current farming practices in Brazil have led to the method of soybean production. And that kind of leads me on to what my next question would be, and that would be, what is the current state of soybean production in Brazil? So how, based on this knowledge you've got of the history of the farming practices and that combination of the intensive and the extensive, how does that show itself? What is the practicality then of soybean production in Brazil?
It's very diverse. You have a lot of different practices, but if you, for example, have some, I would say, a good number of farmers producing organic soybean in Brazil, in the total amount, it will be only 5%, for example.
Wow.
We often explain that we have a Germany inside Brazil made of soybean, because we have the whole territory of Germany comparing just producing soybeans here. So
the land size is the same size as Germany,
yeah,
just producing soybeans in Brazil. That is insane. As a European, that is insane.
That is insane.
Wow. Wow, okay.
So it means that you have a lot of different farmers, different cooperatives, you have different factories, but if you have just a couple of these king of soybeans producing in the very GMO and I would say pesticide driven, this kind of production, it will be more than 10-15% of the total amount of the soybean produced in Brazil. So it's connected to the, of course, the global market, but also to the a very important concept in Brazil and Latin America, that is let's do it as fast as we can, because things will change in the future, and we are not sure if we can exploit more these lands and this kind of labor.
So that sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, that sounds like they're trying to take advantage of it whilst they still can, to try and squeeze every last piece of value, regardless of the consequences. Just
so
with the
if
motivation
you have some consequences, you just move from state to another state, or from Brazil to another country. If you have, for example, environmental legislation and better legislation and control over. So I have been discussing that we develop a kind of agricultural model in Brazil, this hybrid model. It's not only intensive and extensive, but it's very, I would say, racial, a very racial model that we are exporting to other countries. As you can hear in Europe, Brazil is the breadbasket of the world and whatever, and this kind of propaganda. But these big farms are owned and driven by white farmers. Because these historical components always gave some privileges for white European descendants who settled in Brazil, especially here in the south, in late 19th century and early 20th century. So
that still exists, that racial difference in Brazil still exists as a culture, and you can see that in soybean production as well, that you have the white farmers who have been given certain advantages or some kind of benefit in comparison to the non-white farmers.
You can see indigenous blacks and I would say, as we say here, caboclos and caipiras, the mixed populations in privilege in this kind of business. So we are exporting because these guys, these big farmers, they are so rich, so wealthy. They are expanding their business to United States but also to Africa, for example. Part of the deforestation promoted at the Nacala corridor in Mozambique is being driven by Brazilian farmers. So following this model of extensive, intensive, with a lot of capital and pesticides and energy, they need to have some dams, hydroelectrics, and this industrial agriculture, and some people is saying that we are, of course, destroying so much these biological life zones like the Cerrados in Amazonia and Pantanal, the wetlands. We had a very important fire burnings 2 years ago. So it's leading these biological life zones to extinction. So
that's a hugely important factor.
Yeah, we need to forget the idea of future. Yeah, let's fix it in the future because we have technology enough. And some archaeologists are now arguing that there will be no future because all the ecology of the Cerrados, for example, is changing, and the water system is damaged, and so we still don't know what will be the real consequences of these projects of agricultural modernization in the future.
It sounds like they're not going to be good consequences, in my opinion. Like
probably good for Cargill, for Tyson's and others. That they will have a lot of fun about it. Probably there are lots of people who will benefit. Not exactly the indigenous and the peasantry and those ones, but of course, in my studies, I often write with my colleague Claudio Di Maio. Claudio Di Maio is working at the Rachel Carson Center at the Ludwig Maximilian University of Munich. So we are writing about these great narratives about the soy farming, and of course there's the positive one where you all in the world will be benefit because we have more vegetable protein and it brings a lot of animal food, and so now we have pig meat from China and feeding. That's the Green Revolution ideology. Let's feed the world. And facing them, on the contrary, in contrast, we have the declensionist narrative, which is saying that everybody is doing something wrong, and we will have a kind of apocalypse in the near future. So we are trying to understand how complex is this process, and we published an article last year called Towards the Soyacene. It's like instead of Anthropocene, we are living the global south, real soya scene, where the economic, the cultural, the environmental relations are driven by soybeans, and now we are planning. We are editing a book for the next year on the age of soybeans. It's very interesting. Sorry.
Yeah. No, go on. I was just going to say, I saw that you were working on that project, and it sounds really interesting. And for me, when we talk about this, and when you outline the dynamic of soy production in Brazil, the main thing that comes to me is that for these people to win, you say these big corporations, for these people to win, and for even Brazilian farms to take over forest in Mozambique, there are people losing. It's not that there is just winners. There are a lot of losers, and I quite often think in these kind of scenarios, where is there in Brazil a big pushback? So for the bigger farmers to expand, right, they have to take land off other people, or they have to push people out, or I don't know, buy people out, or however they do it in Brazil. But this is what I assume, at least.
Mm-hmm.
And also the vulnerability of the soybean production in Brazil, like you were saying, the water system has changed, the bio, how would you say that, the biological structure that allows soybean production is vulnerable, and also with climate change. I read an article recently which said that soy is very, very vulnerable to climate change. So there's this ideology of the Green Revolution that you were talking about, which sounds positive and feeding the world, but you're doing that with such clear consequences of kicking people out. And also this is quite a convoluted thought, I hope you're following. But yeah, there are winners and there are losers. And there are also the future generations, which are going to be huge losers. So how is there not a huge pushback to this development of industrial farming? Or
well, this is a very interesting and very complex topic. So I will bring you some examples, and if I forget something, you can ask me again. For example, when we think about good and evil narratives, we forget these intra-narratives and intra-experience, which are not exactly settled in both good or bad narratives. For example, here in Brazil, in South Brazil, people use some small farmers. They used to raise pigs and provide these pigs to the slaughterhouses and then export this pig meat. Okay, it's cold here in South Brazil. So in July, when you are enjoying your summer, here we have some temperatures like -4, -5, -8. So it's very cold, and these farms, they had to wake up so early in the morning, to clean the pig spaces and feed the pigs. And it's very this is not the very industrial way, because they suffer a lot. They got cold, they got flu, and after 5 months raising a pig, they got $5 of profit.
So whoa.
Each pig. So when the soybean market is growing, these guys is they are very happy in leave pig farming in order to go dive into the soybean market because I have a very interesting example. One student told me in a town very close down here to Chapecó, there's a guy who has a very small farm, and he's not a farmer. He lives in the city and he builds houses. Every day he works building and fixing houses, and 1 or 2 days he goes to his small farm to sit and to cultivate soybeans and come back to the city, to the town. So it's something like he has a job and he's now cultivating soybeans just for more profit, just because it's profitable. And and as it's very industrialized in comparing to the pig farming, he can have some money and not suffering a lot as the small farmers who are raising pigs and chickens for slaughterhouses. So it means this is a very complex question, and people are very are looking to the scenarios, international scenarios, looking for profit, and sometimes they don't have any investment on organic or sustainable farming. They don't have any loans for that kind of things because this is the scenario, and as it is very profitable, let's try to take advantage of everything as fast as we can. So that's the topic. So, well, it's
aren't people shouting, think about the climate? Aren't people shouting, think about the future? This mentality of let's do everything as fast as we can. There are very obvious logical consequences to that, especially nowadays when people are so aware with the IPCC reports that have come out with, the COP26. It's really, at least maybe it's a very Eurocentric idea, and I can fall into that trap sometimes because Brexit makes me less European than I was a few years ago, but I still consider myself European. But my idea is that the world community is becoming more aware of the consequences of actions that are short-termistic, like let's make the most of soybean production, all of it now, and then fuck the future, basically. But maybe it's, I don't know, maybe I'm simplifying it too much.
No, this is very interesting, but let's say 4 years ago, I was watching a very interesting movie made in Brazil, but it was directed by a German director. It's called Agri-businesses. Apocalypse, agribusiness, yeah. And during that movie, that is a very interesting but sad part. That, for example, in Mato Grosso, in the state of Mato Grosso, they have a very big farm. And in the middle of that big farm, there's an indigenous reservation. So what was the big farmers' strategy to push these indigenous out of their own lands? It was to close the roads. So the indigenous were very isolated. So they had no food. These indigenous, the movie shows, they were eating rats, mouses, because they have no space enough to cultivate their lands. They have no roads. And after that movie, a German woman asked me, how can you in Latin America do it? How can a big farmer can do it? You are hurting a lot of people because you are just wanting to cultivate soybean. And of course, I told her, I understand why that big farm is doing that, even though I strongly disagree. But this is the cultural world we live, which is very different from the European progressive environmentalist thought and the producers in South America. This is a long way different because first there's the racial question. For these big farmers who are white farmers, the indigenous are not considered at the bottom of the question humans. So
yeah, it's really that kind of explicit. Like it's not.
They don't
it's not in law,
don't say this, but they think this,
and they show it through various actions, such as kicking. Wow, that is horrible to hear. But yeah, okay.
Very terrible. And of course, this is just the first part of the question. Moreover, they say that Brazil is big because it's a great nation because we cultivate the land. There's a very specific kind of thought that claims that land is here to be cultivated. So you need to bring down the forest. You need to make all this not organized nature in a very planified monoculture. The idea of rational, enlightened, technological hubris words. But at the same time, they are not enlightened in terms of social justice, for example. So I'm trying to show you how we are having two very different words connected through soybeans.
But from what you're talking about, it sounds like it's a dominant ideology within Brazil, and it's kind of linked to a national feeling or a national right that it is our right to cultivate the land in not necessarily monoculture practice, but to sort of not industrialize but humanize the land to make it our own instead of protecting it. But there must be strong rejection, strong alternative ideologies that try to push that dominant ideology out. It's quite, but maybe I'm still being very Eurocentric, and obviously I can't separate the two, but I have a feeling at least that there would be quite like a large part of the population, the people who are not benefiting from the land, and the people who, for example, the indigenous, who aren't the white Brazilians or the lower racial classes, if you will, that they would think, fuck this. You're just, maybe not from an environmentalist perspective, but even from an economic perspective, that.
Well, sure, we are a very big country, and we have a lot of different people thinking about different conceptions of agriculture. The universities are very committed to think alternatives of agricultural production. We have the social movements, we have isolated farms who are thinking by themselves how to bring sustainable management. So my narrative about this endangered country and endangered continent, which is South America and Latin America, is more exactly showing you what the positive narrative don't bring it to you, because European Union is very needy for vegetable protein, and you can for some governments it means that they will have stability to create democracy if they have grains and food enough to feed their populations. It's a biopolitical question. On the other hand, we have a lot of people thinking about these alternative projects. So soybean is so profitable that just a few people are thinking about alternative projects in soybeans. Why? Profitable, probably, because you have here in Brazil, there's a very important study made by one of my colleagues at the Rachel Carson Center, Claire Lagier. She wrote about the landless peasant movement, the MST here in Brazil, which is a very grassroots movement, very real fan of these guys. But in terms of they go struggle against the latifundia and the big farmers, but regarding the soybean topic, specific one, they are not committed to organic, non-GMO and non-pesticide, because another study in Argentina shows that some farmers from Via Campesina and these international peasantry movements, they are committed to organic soybean, but within that big plantation they have a conventional soybean plantation based on pesticides, GMO, because they need to sell this production in order to provide their children to study abroad, for example. They need money.
Yeah.
So it's very controversial, and we can't blame about that. Some people are doing what they can do about that. But what is the problem? In my opinion, it's not the state, it's not the farmers, it's not exactly the corporations. It's the connection between these different actors, because the state is having a lot of fun having reais in dollars. The Brazilian money is called real. So if you produce in reais and you exchange in dollars, you have a lot of profit. So the state is very comfortable about that situation. And so after that, the state can bring some part of this money, a small part, and try to provide some natural or environmental programs and this kind of stuff. And so at the same time, glyphosate and these pesticides, which are prohibited in European Union, are there are lots of open doors here in South America because it's very profitable, and these Syngenta and these corporations, they put a lot of money into the hands of politicians to make lobbies and to approve, to regulate this kind of pesticide-free country here in Brazil, for example. So it's very complex, but and of course we can bring a lot of alternative projects and programs, but at this point the state and the corporations and the big farmers, they are not interested in quit, because let's think about a very important data, because European Union is buying a lot of Brazilian soybeans, but it means only 4%.
4% of the exports.
Yeah, export. China, on the other hand, is buying 80% of the Brazilian soybeans to raise pigs. And probably their pigs will feed not only Chinese population but also exported to European Union. So we have a very interesting but not a healthy food chain, starting sometimes from indigenous lands and going to China, and this protein becomes pig meat, and now you are having it in Norway or Denmark, for example. At the same time, we were talking about imperialism in the United States, but also I would say in Denmark, you are in Denmark cultivating about 20% of your territorial size of the Denmark territory in Argentina. So it means that Argentina is committed to exchange part of the soybean production with Denmark in a territory which is 20% of the Denmark territory. So it means colonialism in another way.
Yeah.
It's the same thing that Japan and Brazil are doing in Mozambique.
So Japan is also part of the destruction of the
Japan has no lands enough to cultivate soybeans in this proportion.
No, and I think it's a very prescient point that you're making about the link between a country like Denmark and the demand of the meat industry in Denmark, leading to the size of 20% of Denmark being dedicated to soybean production in Argentina. And I think that's so important to remember, living in a country like Denmark, where you don't see the real impact of your food or the hidden costs of your food. It's bizarre thinking that I could have eaten something. I don't eat too much meat. That sounds like I'm showing off on the podcast. but it sounds bizarre, like bizarre that you can have a hamburger and it could have been raised on soybeans from Argentina or Brazil, then shipped to China, and then brought back to Denmark as a finished product. That is absurd. That is, considering the consequences of these actions we've got in the face of the biodiversity crisis, the food crisis, the climate crisis. It's not happy thoughts I'm having now. No, you seem very calm, which is making me feel a bit calmer, I guess, seeing as you've got all this knowledge and still are calm.
So let me put some more alcohol in this burning fire.
Yes. Yes. Please do.
Some months ago, here in this state of Rio Grande do Sul, it's very close from here. The Federal Department of Policy in Brazil, they realized that some people were taking soybeans for cultivating, which has a lot of poison, pesticides. These guys were washing these seeds and then exchanging and selling these seeds for the international market as seeds for human consumption.
Jesus.
Not enough. I will bring another one.
Keep going. I'm in the zone.
28 indigenous here in the state of Rio Grande do Sul. Of course, I'm wrong. 28 families. They were out of the indigenous land because there was a fight between two groups inside the indigenous land. Part of the group had the support of big farmers to cultivate soybean, rice, and beans, and the other part was very upset about this kind of exchange between part of the indigenous and part of the farmers, and of course destroying their lands, and they had a lot of problems, and some of these big farmers supporters got some guns and gave some shots in the aldea and the indigenous lands and expropriating 28 families from their lands. So the Brazilian justice representatives said that all the soybeans you are consuming in Europe have some indigenous children's blood inside. It's a metaphor, but it's very strong. And of course, we have a lot of problems in every food chain in any part of the world, but soybean is making these problems more radical, stronger and stronger.
And it seems like quite maybe it's not an extreme example, but it's the most extreme example of a horrendous food system that is incredibly important to international trade and international food consumption. It's the worst one I've heard so far. And I'm sure you've got more examples, and I think I'm prepared to listen to a couple more, because we haven't talked about it yet, but part of the observatory project, maybe I'm not explaining it well, was to label. It's kind of positive as well. It feels like a nice segue into maybe some hopeful-ish things. But you were trying to have labeled food with no child labor, and this aspect of child labor is still a bit vague to me. So if you'd like to explain and expand on what the child labor situation is in soybean production in Brazil.
Yeah, when I got back from Germany from my postdoc, I met one of my colleagues, Antonio Inácio Andreoli, who is our former vice dean here at the UFFS, and he had this idea of creating a socio-environmental observatory of the soybean cultivation in the southern cone, Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay, and Uruguay, which have a very similar situation. And after some years bringing this idea, now in May next month, we will celebrate the inauguration of this observatory. It's an interdisciplinary observatory having natural scientists making and providing some data on pesticides, on cancer, on healthy issues, and at the same time providing us this data in order for historians and social scientists writing reports. And one of the ideas we have is on a near future to develop this child labor free label, not only child labor free, but indigenous lands free label. The kind of your soybean is not cultivated and is not expropriating indigenous and traditional populations from their lands. So we would like to explore a lot of these problems here, pesticide free, and of course this kind of different problems, and provide a kind of certification for small farmers, for organic farmers, for those who are interested in alternative processes of soybean cultivation. Because, for example, China is intending to track every grain of soybean bought from Brazil next year. In up to 3 years, they expected to track 100% of their importations of soybean. So we need to provide these stakeholders what they need in order to understand that there are some alternative process in these lands. It's not easy. First, because we are historians, and historians are not exactly. We don't know how to manage things, but we are trying. We are having a lot of partners, and as part of some projects here approved by our group, we are calling this group as the Soya Scene Group, trying to provide this kind of discussion and how soybeans are molding relations here. And we expect, of course, in partnership with your project, we can exchange information, and you can bring us some future partners from every part of the world who would be interested in discussing this kind of things.
Yeah, I think the Our Food, Our Future initiative would be very interested in collaboration, because it's so important for the food culture in Europe to understand what supports a lot of that food culture. And I think being a civil society organization in 14 different countries, all of whom have a coalition of various civil society organizations who all have an interest in a just food system, I think a transparent labeling system would be amazing. I am very curious to see how that works in practice, considering the what I assume to be huge fight back from the large farmers, the large agrochemical industry, basically just industrial food system, and how you would implement it, what the logistics are. So you can do all this research about what is not necessarily just sustainable, but also ethical in its production, and you can create a label for this. But then how do you legitimize this label? Have you got a plan of action for that?
We are developing some talks to the social movements, the grassroots movements. In part, we have some associations of rural workers. We are some agroecological associations interested. I have been trying to convince some friends from the MST, but we are very flexible at this point, because in order, of course, think with me, it's very easy for me to talk about you need to change your agricultural practice and your and the way you collaborate with the food of your family. It's very easy for me, but they need to convince themselves about this bad, I would say very bad agricultural practice surrounding the soybean chain. One of my colleagues, Brian Lander, from the Brown University, he has said the problem is not soybean. The problem is the humans managing the soybeans. This is the problem. He told something quite similar. But we need to think about this kind of question, because soybean, it's very important. It brings about 50% of protein in a grain. So we can try, of course, to develop more sustainable practices and more humanistic relations, humanistic and non-humanistic relations, because we need to understand the cycles of nature and the soils, how it works, and how it can how the soils can be fed with these monocultures or not. And we need to think about ecology in general. So after all, we can try to convince some partners to join the project, and then to make it more, to legitimize this process. But this is the Brazilian way. It's very flexible and it's very open for your contributions.
Here in Europe, we need rigidity. We need full-fledged plans, and then we don't necessarily follow them, but we need that plan.
Yeah, that's the problem of different cultures because people here they need to understand that this is not very pragmatic. It's more, of course, if you offer some profit, it could be very pragmatic. But on this kind of progressive farming, you need to convince people that this could be profitable in a broader sense, not only in terms of money, but also for social environment and healthy.
Some would say there are bigger motivations that should be obvious, and no matter where you're from in the world, still very obvious. I would hope that even in a different culture, the idea of profit above all is still quite strange. My image of the world is that Europe is more susceptible to that belief than other parts, but maybe that's a misconception I have, being a European.
Because part of the Europeans are here as part of the Syngenta, selling some pesticides for Latin America. And that's the topic, that's the main point. These connections between Europe, United States, China, and the global south. Of course, if we could change something regarding to the soybean, we could bring more democratic situations between the global north and the global south. So this is it's biopolitical in many senses, from the grain to the big policies around us. But of course, there are a lot of Europeans who are here bringing good alternatives and good projects, trying to understand how Latin Americans can get out of these problematic and endangered situations.
Sounds a bit white saviory, but maybe not. Sounds a bit like we kind of got you into this mess by bringing our ideologies, and now we're kind of we're trying to get you out of this mess, even though we still haven't sorted it out ourselves at home. But then maybe that's my inner cynic coming out. So that's
in terms of ideologies, every country has a lot of and always exchanging. We often have a lot of scholars thinking in new possibilities on post-development, and now we are focused on these traditional populations' way of life and how we can learn from them in terms of understanding the environment as our house, as Gaia is having more destructive handling, more these fragile ecosystems in a sustainable way. So sometimes we need to exchange. These kind of development systems, they are not for everybody in every part of the world. They can work in some villages and regional systems, but our struggle is to understand how we are in a very endangered world, living a war, and leaving the authoritarian, very authoritarian governments flourishing everywhere. And my question is how soybean flourishes better in authoritarian systems. So it's a metaphor, because if you connect politics to this kind of grains, you will realize that the military dictatorships in Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay, and Uruguay boosted this kind of monoculture, exportation, intensive, and racism kind of agriculture. So I'm wondering about this exchanging of ideologies are more complex than we often think about.
I think you've made it very clear that soybean production in Brazil is far from simple.
This is my task.
It's your life goal.
If things were very simple, I could be solve that from myself. But things are very complex, so I need a lot of help. And I'm here to ask for you all for some help.
I found it enlightening to hear you make the links between soybean production in Brazil and larger worldwide trends, and also how the dictatorships within Latin America were so influential in increasing this ideology, maybe through various forms of propaganda. We haven't necessarily spoken about the means that they did it, but maybe that is a good question to ask. How did they? So you say that during times of authoritarianism, soybean production and certain crop cultures improve, and I think improve should be clarified here as are made more efficiently, or can be made more profit of, or whatever. What methods did they use to do that?
Soybean was first introduced in Latin America, Southern Cone, at the end of 19th century. And in the beginning, the first 3 decades of the 20th century, it was grown as a backyard plant here in Brazil, in Argentina as well, in Paraguay, because it's a very good plant to fix nitrogen, and it was very important as a complementary crop. So the first exportations of Brazil was only, I believe, in 1940s or 1950s, just a couple of tons to Europe, if I'm not wrong. After World War II, we have the concept of great acceleration and the industrialization of nature, and this kind of let's think on terms of Cold War, where the western part was driven by the United States, and in this specific process of the soybean spread, we can see the relationship between United States and these countries, because United States developed a very important market and research system on soybeans in the 1920s. And after the World War II, they spread these agri-systems to the global south, some countries in Asia, Africa, but mostly in Latin America. And after the military coups in Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay, Chile, Uruguay, Bolivia, in 1950s and 60s and 70s, there was a lot of exchanges between these Latin American farmers and scholars, researchers in United States institutions. I'm talking about 5,000 scholars and researchers and farmers who visit the United States, trying to understand this Central Western agribusiness system in Ohio, Illinois, and trying to bring this agribusiness system to these countries. In Brazil, more specifically, soybean is connected to the dictatorship because the military government created a very important research company, which is Embrapa. It's famous around the world. The Brazilian, I don't remember the English name, but Brazilian. Sorry. And of course, at that moment, the militaries also promoted the internal migration from south to the central west and north. And who are the southern farmers? They are often Italian and German descendants who migrated at the turn of 19th to 20th century. They got some privileges. Of course, they suffered a lot with the government abandonment, but the Caucasian, as Alfred Crosban, the historian, used to say, there's a kind of interpretation that the Caucasian are more inclined to technologies and this kind of interpretations that are very good for politicians to think about that. Oh, let's bring white immigrants because we have a lot of blacks and indigenous, and they are not inclined to civilization. So let's bring the civilized one. And of course, these Germans and Italians and Polish and French and Spanish, Portuguese, and some people from Middle East, they had a lot of problems here in order to adapt to the climate and the weather and whatever. But they also had some privilege because they had 10 to 20 years to pay for the land instead of, for example, the mixed people here who were expropriated from their lands. After half century, these poor Italians and German descendants, they became the progressive farmers, and the government come back to them to invest in these families because they would be the drivers of the agricultural modernization of Brazil. And then the Brazilian dictatorship brought some poor people from northeast to Amazonia in order to, there's a big forest there. We don't know what exactly we're gonna do with the Amazonia, so let's bring the poor people there. And some of the civilized southerns, let's bring here to this center, west, and north in order to populate this demographic emptiness. It's a very concept, a crazy concept we have here in Brazil. So in sum, it's a combination of agricultural research provided by the military government and the farmers most considered as most skilled farmers and the United States and big corporations influence on the seeds and machinery and pesticides and the inputs to control the environment. So this is in my thesis, this is the component. Of course, during the 1970s, they were very interested in rice and beans because after the oil crisis in 1973, there was a very problematic situation in terms of hungriness in Brazil. So these basic crops were very important to keep the political balance in Brazil and avoid some revolts. But after the 1970s, the exchange between the Brazilian currency and the dollar make it very profitable to bring some crops such as soybean. So you have in Brazil a small amount of soybean until the 1970s, and after the expanding of agricultural frontier westward and north during the 1970s and 80s, it exploded. So, and soybean has been dry. Of course, I've been sometimes focused on soybeans, but it's a very complex chain because it needs grasses, it needs beyond the inputs because you need to connect soybeans with cattle. After you can't cultivate more soybean, you put grasses and make that as a place for cattle. So it's very connected. I often speak about soybean, but it's related to cattle expansion as well.
So they use the soybean land in periods where they're not cultivating soybean for cattle to graze on grassland? Or?
Yeah, you cultivate for some years, and the soil, of course, is not good enough for more harvests, and then you put some grasses over the soil and will bring cattle. That's the last and most dangerous part of the agricultural frontier, because what could you do after cattle? Because the soil will be totally depleted, and of course some people will criticize me and say that technology will save us in the future, transforming the grasses into a garden, but this is not the Latin American way.
It's also a technocratic belief that is not grounded too often in reality. And you can also draw a lot of parallels with solutions for the climate crisis in general, with that idea that in the future we'll have solutions to these problems now. And you ask the people behind these solutions, when are they going to be here then? Oh, soon. It'll be fine. And then they continue to belong. Like nuclear energy is a good parallel with fusion technology. It's like, this is going to save our energy problem. And then
you are living a war in Europe, and people are saying there's a problematic question regarding the Russian gas. We are talking about energy. We are fighting in every part of the world for water, for oil, and for these kinds of with very problematic situations. I remind me that you asked me about the climate change. I have been studying the cerrados. Cerrados is the Brazilian savannas. It's a huge, vast territory in central Brazil. You can compare this territory to the size of combined UK, Germany, Spain, and France. You have, it's a huge territory, and 61% of this territory is grassland. And this is the central part of Brazil that the Europe environmentalists are forgetting to talk about. We often talk about Amazonia, but the Cerrados is bringing a lot of environmental problems because it was a kind of wasteland. For more than 1 century, people consider that lands as wasteland. But except for the Green Revolution practitioners, because they saw that topography very plain, very the weather is very defined because you have the season, rain season and the summer season. So it was very good to cultivate pineapple and eucalyptus and, of course, after all, soybeans and cattle. And we are now, since 2014, 8 years ago, there was a very important hydro crisis in the state of São Paulo, the most industrialized state in the country. But São Paulo is in the Atlantic forest, nothing to do to the Cerrado. But it was having a lot of consequences of the deforestation of the savanna. And we in Brazil, let's think that some people are lying about environmental changes, but the other part who are very committed to understand the climate changes, they don't understand. We as scientists, we don't understand all the dynamics of the climate and the integration between the biological life zones, and how if you change things in the north, it will bring more consequences possibly to the south, or maybe on Paraguay, on Peru or other country, because environmental problems and crises has no borders. And that's the question. The savanna is the cradle of Brazilian waters. We often think about Amazonia, but there's a very important ecology in these dry lands, because the corky small trees, they have roots sizing up to 18 meters. So we call it dwarf trees with giant roots. So unfortunately you probably won't see, but it's a savanna vegetation. which these big roots connect the water, the rainwater, to the soil. And now you often put it down, burn these trees, and you are bringing to replace it soybeans, which has 30 centimeters of roots. So it don't connect the rainwater to the soils. And these subterranean waters are as I told you, the cradle of the Brazilian waters, because 5 of the most important basins in Brazil are connected to these savannas. So this is very problematic situation.
It's fascinating to hear how it's all linked. Yeah.
And the problem is the problematic situations is subterranean. We can't see the damage we are making. And
that's a good analogy for the rest of the climate crisis. I think a lot of the time it's we have an action and we don't see the consequences, so don't appreciate them. So I think that's a really interesting point. I think also that is all we've got time for. But it's been really interesting, and thank you so much for sharing all of this knowledge. I feel like I've been on a cultural, historical, philosophical journey of soybean production in Brazil, and I have learnt way more than I was expecting to. Not that sounds like my expectations were low. It was more that you've outlined the topic in such a way that I didn't think was possible, and I am grateful for that. Thank you very much. Would you like to plug anything? So we've talked about your observatory project. Is there anything else you would like to mention that you're working on now?
Sure. I have a lot of friends here at the Universidade Federal da Fronteira Sul. I would like to thank them, such as Antônio Inácio Andreoli, who is a very close friend and smart guy who is thinking about these ecological and social problems related to soybean. 3 years ago, he was awarded to the Bavarian Prize of Environmental Protection in Munich, Germany. We have a very good laboratory on environmental history here with my friends Samira Moreto and Marlon Brandt. We are close friends. We are working together. I'd like to mention the guy who gave me the idea of researching about soybean, who is my close friend Jo Klanovics. And I would like to thank you to Claudio Di Maio, who is an Italian friend who is supporting and inviting me to participate in the European world with my ideas. Of course, we are support from important Brazilian institutions. I would like to mention the CNPq, the Brazilian Council of Research Development, and the FAPESC, which is my state, Santa Catarina research institution. I would like to just say a couple of words that next year we are publishing a book on the age of soybean, and we got a lot of very interesting researchers, scholars from around the world, from the United States, from Argentina, from Brazil, from Sweden, from Italy, from Lesotho, from India and a lot of countries who came together very kindly to collaborate to discuss this very important topic. So finally, I would like to invite you and your project and every one of those who are possibly will listen this podcast to join us. I promise you we will have a web page in a few months, and you probably keep on touch by the website or by email or a smoke signal or something similar, a bottle, a message in a bottle or something similar.
I'll send my pigeon.
Yeah, anyway, we enjoy to collaborate. Anytime you need, we are here ready to trying to exchange. I'm really trying to support a narrative on history of soybeans, not based on numbers and statistics, because I would like to make things more real to the Europeans and to the worldwide inhabitants who are interested in these very dramatic narratives we are living in. Thank you so much. I'm here. We are all here. And please look to Latin America in order to try to solve just a small part of our problems. First of all, get out Bolsonaro and leave us here. And please, the Hague, I hope he would be in prison in a couple of years, probably.
That's something we can all hope for, yeah. And we managed to speak about soybean production and the historical and cultural context in Brazil for a decent time and not mention Bolsonaro. I think that's quite impressive in a way.
Next time I can mention him, because it would be necessary to have at least 4 hours to start a quick conversation on his madness.
I think we could talk for weeks about the madness of Jair Bolsonaro. Yeah, and if you ever want to talk about Boris as well, then we could have a nice chat. I can share my frustrations. But anyway, thank you very, very much for coming onto the show. I really appreciate it, and we all appreciate it here at Our Food, Our Future. Any details about Dr. Claiton will be in the notes for the episode, and you can find that in the episode description. As a disclaimer, this was produced with the financial support of the European Union. Its contents are the sole responsibility of and do not necessarily reflect the views of the European Union. We've got a lot going on in Mellemfolkelijk Samenwerken Aarhus. We are a Danish NGO that works for a more just and sustainable world, collaborating with global partners worldwide as part of the ActionAid Alliance. Here in Aarhus, we have over 100 volunteers working together to run a not-for-profit cafe and campaign and educate in areas ranging from feminism and climate justice to anti-discrimination and economic inequality, to queer issues and refugee rights. You can come down to Café Mellemfolk every day but Sunday for amazing food, drinks and events in a cozy cafe run by our lovely volunteers. Everything is also vegan, which is great. You can also get involved with our events, activities and campaigns, and even running the cafe as a volunteer yourself. So check out Instagram and Facebook to find out more information about the cafe and our campaigns by looking up Café Mellemfolk or Mellemfolkelijk Samenwerken Aarhus. We're following the links in the episode notes. And check out Podbean, YouTube and other podcast providers for more episodes, interviews and cool stuff. Details are in the episode description. Thank you everyone for listening, and until next time.